In this interview, I talk with Chaitra, who is an online course creator and service provider, and she walks through a really cool story of how she went from getting off maternity leave, having her first child, having $0 in revenue from her business, basically sitting there for the 18 months of maternity leave, to in the last 7 months growing it to over $100,000 in revenue. About 75% coming from the service work she does and 25% coming from an online course she does. Has done $25,000 in sales in her online course. She walks through all the details of how she did that, one simple marketing strategy she used, and how it's evolved over time. So hope you enjoy. Chaitra, what is your business? What do you sell and who do you help?
Okay, so basically I have a design studio. So I help product-based businesses really grow their sales and income through creating like really high converting Shopify websites. And on the side, I do also have a product photography course, which helps shop owners, the same target audience, also take great photos that can again help them stand out and increase sales for their business.
So kind of an agency that does done for you Shopify setup stuff and then do it yourself course that optimizes product images itself. Is that right?
Yeah, they can take their own product photos using their iPhone instead of having to hire a product photographer, for example. So they can just buy my course and learn how to take really high quality photos using their iPhone. And on the Shopify website side of stuff, I'm pretty much like alone with one team member. So I wouldn't call it an agency, but yeah, it's a design studio. Yeah, I would call it. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
So how do you get clients for those two businesses?
So I've had my design studio for almost 5 years, but I went off on maternity leave for almost 18 months in 2019. So when I got back to business in 2020, everything had dried up. I had 0 leads, 0 clients, anything. And I was also pivoting into Shopify specifically. I wanted to focus on just product-based businesses. So in that particular niche or industry, I did not have any kind of leads or anything. So I literally started from scratch. And the biggest way I was able to grow leads. So initially I started with the product photography course. That was the focus for my 2020. So I started building a product-based businesses audience through partnerships, right? So not exclusively for the Shopify part of the business, but I started building leads for the product photography school course. So my name started getting out there. And every time I used to do these webinars and stuff, I also used to introduce myself as I'm also a Shopify designer. And now let's talk about product photography. And people would be like, oh, I'm interested in the Shopify designer part because it's the same target audience, right? I'm literally talking to the same person who would benefit from the Shopify design services as well. So every time I finished a partnership webinar, I would have 3 new inquiries in my inbox for Shopify websites, although I was talking about product photography. And so I started getting leads through that for Shopify websites as well. And my name started getting out there. So that's how I started building up some, Shopify leads and projects and started filling my pipeline with some projects. Yeah.
So let's go to the very end point. How much revenue have you done in sales with the course itself?
With the course itself, it is about $24,000. Okay. Yeah.
And over what time period? When did that first launch?
I started in June. That was my first launch when I launched in June, and that was a $10,000 launch. And then I have, been doing partnerships again, like here and there, and that has led to another $15,000 in revenue. Yeah.
And how much revenue has come to the Shopify Design Studio from those leads as well?
Okay, Shopify Design Studio, the total revenue is obviously around 75 to 80K. Okay. So that was like a big chunk of my revenue, this Shopify project. And those leads came from multiple sources, but I think there's one more thing I wanted to share. So although this was not directly related to partnerships for Shopify, I was like scrolling through Facebook. I saw a post which said, hey, we're looking for a Shopify designer. And I'm like, okay, if I just put my name there, it's not going to go anywhere, right? So I'm like, and at the same time, I was sending out partnership like emails and things, outreach for my product photography class. So I had that bone and like that muscle, which I was like, I can use this for this too. So there was this contact, right, who I had to contact. And I wrote a personal email to her. I'm like, hey, love your stuff. Came across this post about Shopify. I'm here if you are interested and this is my work. That's it. It was just like a 5 to 7 line email, but I did it because I learned about partnerships and I learned, otherwise I would have never ever reached out on my own to somebody. But through partnerships, the biggest thing that I learned was it's okay to put yourself out there, and it's actually better to put yourself out there because you will attract the kind of work you want to when you do that, right? If you let it just run its course, then you'll get all kinds of leads and it might not be your dream clients. But when you're intentional about going out there and attracting people, then you are most likely to land your dream customers and clients. So yeah, that was actually one of my best projects. It actually happened. She actually responded. She's a really big designer, and I wasn't hoping she would respond or anything, but yeah, she responded, and it turned out to be one of my best projects, and that actually kicked off my whole Shopify Design Studio to grow as well. So yeah, that was an interesting thing that came out of partnerships in a very not unexpected way.
Yeah, well, first, congrats. I mean, that's $100,000 since you get back from maternity leave between Design Studio and course sales. That's significant. Great work. I mean, that's less than a year in, so that's really cool. So I want to dive into specific. You've done a variety of types of partnerships, borrowing other people's audiences over the last year.
Yeah.
One of them that I've heard about is your partnership with Privy. Can you tell me, before we go into the details of that one, I'd love to dial into that one or one specific one and like unpack it completely. How do you find different companies to partner with? Like, what do you look for and where do you look for them?
First I started with my own circle, like if I knew anybody and things like that. So I love like how you guided us like through that partnership, like getting that initial dream 50 list. I think that was very crucial, and I still have that list and I haven't gone through a lot of them, and I'm like, what will happen to my business if I actually get through the entire list? I barely have done like 10 outreach, I think 10 to 15, and that itself has like led to tremendous growth. So I don't know what will happen if I really follow up through everything. But while looking for those companies, I think I was basically looking for very specific, like who is my, dream customers and who has that kind of audience. And I did make them. I didn't stop myself from thinking like, oh, I don't think they'll collaborate with somebody like me. I'm just a starter. I'm just a newbie. Why would they collaborate? I kept that aside and I made my dream 50 list despite having all those fears, and I think I really went for it. I'm like, what's the worst case that would happen? Like, they'll just say a no, so it was okay. But I think the biggest thing was like really researching on Google, coming up with companies. And when I got one company, let's say for example one business, then I would go and see who they've collaborated with, or who who is most likely that I can reach through them and things like that. So that was really helpful. So mostly I was looking at who had my dream customers and really going deep inside their businesses.
So in doing that research, you come across Privy. Why did they stick out, and what did you have to offer them? You're just starting out, no leads, no audience, no, like, very minimal in all those categories. So like, why did they stand out, and what made you confident they would allow you to get in front of their audience?
So they were coming out with a podcast. I remember at the same time, I had just made my list of people to contact, and Preview was a name in it, but I wasn't planning to reach out to them, until some time. But I saw the CEO of their company put out a post on Facebook in a Facebook group saying, "Hey, we're starting a podcast and we're looking for some speakers. Let us know if you want to bring somebody on." And I was like, this is perfect because I have the knowledge of product photography. They have an audience who would benefit from that knowledge of product photos. Like, all business owners, like online shop owners, need great product photos to stand out and show off their products. And I knew Privy's audience would be very much interested in that kind of knowledge. So I felt like it would be a perfect fit. And since he was asking for podcast episodes and podcast guests, I was like, this is perfect. And I just wrote to them saying, hey, I'd be interested in, you were looking for podcast guests, and I think I would be great because I can teach your audience about product photography, which will help them increase sales. And that's how I reached out, and I didn't hear back from them for about a week. But after that, they did get back, and it was awesome. Yeah, we did a podcast episode, and yeah, it went really well.
Okay, so you find them, and that's a cool mechanism. I think that's one interesting thing that a lot of people that found out about this approach to marketing for the first time are like, why on earth would they want to promote me? And like people are desperate for content, whether it's blog posts or interviews or YouTube videos or webinar, like they're actively any content manager is actively seeking out content at all times.
Yeah.
And like one of the popular questions is, and I'll ask you this in a second, but like, well, do I have to pay them in order to go on there? It's like, no, that's actually the opposite of that. That would be super weird if you offered that. There are paid partnerships where like you do affiliate splits, but like, this is not that.
Yeah.
So that's cool. I'd love to get even a screenshot of the post that the CEO posted just to like show people that in action. Like this is somebody who's running a podcast, who's literally asking for people to come on the podcast so he can feature you because he just needs the content. Like that's the key. You just be the content. It doesn't matter what your background or audience or company stage is. None of that matters at all.
Yeah.
So, all right, technical question. You find that post by the Privy guy. You're like, oh, that would be a great fit. You reach out to him, you book it, you do the interview. There's a gap between doing a podcast interview and you getting 1,000 leads and your revenue growing by whatever dollar revenue it goes. So go to the end first. What was the result of that partnership? And then connect the dots between how you did a podcast interview and how you generated leads and sales.
So the podcast interview happened, and a few weeks later it came out, and I think I got more Shopify inquiries through that than product photography leads. It's weird how things work, right? Yeah, so I got a few product photography leads into I have a free email course, which I promoted on the podcast episode. And people joined that email course and got into my funnel. But I am not sure exactly how they found out about my Shopify Design Studio. They probably clicked over to my website and they were like, oh, she does Shopify too. So I know 3 or 4 inquiries that came as a direct result of that podcast episode. So that happened. But for in specific product photography, like for my course itself, I reached out specifically to other smaller businesses who I could do a JV webinar with. So this was podcast with Privy that, kind of really increased my visibility and brought in Shopify inquiries and brought in leads to my funnel. But with direct, product photography, sales, and things like that, I reached out to other small businesses that I could do like a presentation or a JV webinar with. And that's how I was able to, and at the end of the webinar, I was able to, talk to them about my product photography course and really tell them how it would be helpful for them. And that's how I was able to really generate sales through partnerships for my course directly.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about the Privy thing and then go down to the JVs you did. So on Privy, you did the interview. You had a free course, and that's kind of what you mentioned / promoted on the podcast. Any idea how many subscribers you got from that?
I don't have an exact measure of that because there was no way to measure just who came from Privy. Right. Yeah. So
and you got a handful of like design studio leads from it. Any idea if any of those turned into clients yet or?
It was weird, but this happened. So I had so Privy later came out with a book called the Ecommerce Handmark Marketing Handbook.
Yeah, I've seen it.
Yeah, it's right there. So they were that book has like 17 experts who were teaching everything A to Z about e-commerce to product-based businesses. So they were like, we're going to include you too because your product photography stuff was awesome. People loved it, and it's so valuable to include in the book. And one chapter and one of the experts was me. So that happened. And day before, it's so coincidental, I posted it on Instagram that I was on this book. And just a few weeks ago, I landed a Shopify client. And I was talking to her, and she's like, it was a big project. It was a 5-figure project. And she was telling me that you know what? I was deciding, about who to hire for the Shopify project and stuff. And I was just clicked on your Instagram and I saw that you were on that book. And my husband was like, she's your girl. You got to hire her because Privy is a big deal. And there was one of the experts in that book along with me who he was a big fan of.
Yeah.
And he was like, if she is alongside that guy, that means she's good.
Yeah. Like that right there is that you do
Yeah.
one podcast interview, you get some number, maybe a couple hundred subscribers to your free course or something.
Yeah.
You pick up a few leads from it. Maybe they convert, maybe they don't. But then like just the serendipity part, like you get promoted over here as a result of that in a handbook. And like the fascinating part is the trust transfer stuff, like you just outlined of, well, they
Yes.
saw me next to this person and I trust that person. So she's got to be good. And like
Yes.
that's how we all operate. Like we can't vet out every single person and it's hard to build that trust from scratch. So having your face right next to someone that they trust, like that's like the whole thing.
Yes, exactly. So it's just so weird, like how something you put out there might not immediately bring results, but it's kind of building up for you in the back end. And you never know how it'll come into play and really work for you in favor
Yeah,
of your business. Yeah.
that's really cool. So what partnership types have been the most successful in driving revenue for you?
Webinars for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah. So I would reach out to smaller businesses who had a similar like target audience that I wanted to get in front of, and I would do a webinar for their audience, and that would also grow my list, and also it would bring in sales for the course. So hands down, webinars have been great.
And so how do you find someone to do that? And then is that a revenue split with them or how does that part work?
Yeah, so I found them basically just through like normal research. I was in a few conferences that I had spoken at a couple conferences which had my target audience, and I went and looked at all the other speakers in the conference because probably they would be in the same industry too. So I saw a lot of people there. I found a lot of partners there, and I reached out. So that's how I reached out to some of the businesses I did webinars with. And the revenue split, yeah, it was around 40% for the partner and 60% for me. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. So what's your plan for partnerships going forward?
Yes, I need to do more of them, definitely, because I think that is what has led to great growth. So I am going to make a plan and reach out to the rest of the people in the dream partners list that I made, and really put myself out there and start reaching out and see how things go. And yeah, mostly I think I want to get more on like podcasts and do more of these webinars. I think these two I found were like really good and worked out for me, getting on, being a guest on podcasts and also doing webinars. Yeah.
Hey, this is a super in the weeds thing that you might find interesting as you do more podcast stuff. I was doing an interview with Dustin Reichman, I think might be his name. Anyway, I forget his last name. It's on the blog. We did an interview a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
He's in a lot. He has a physical product. It's called Fire Creek Snacks. It's meat sticks. And he just does podcast interviews, tries to do 1 or 2 a week. And they've been like huge for growth of his company. And he was saying, I never thought of this metric before, but it's a really cool way of thinking about it. He said, you can take on a podcast, just look at the number of, assume the podcast is active. If it's inactive, then throw everything out. And this is just a rule of thumb. But he said, what he's found is take the number of reviews that a podcast has and via an interview. And he has I don't know, I think his average order value is $50 to $100 or something like that. So I'm sure this goes up if you have a smaller, lower priced, or the conversion rate goes down if you have a higher priced product. But he finds he can convert a third to a half of the number of reviews to actual paying customers in a podcast interview. So if a podcast has 100 reviews, he can get anywhere from 33 to 50 customers directly on the podcast interview just by mentioning the product and the intro and the outro. And he's played around with different offer types. Like you'll have a coupon code, or he mentioned on that interview like 3 different specials. I forget what they are now that he's run. And I was like, that's kind of interesting when you're building a Dream 50, especially with podcast, which is one of the easier ones to do because you have basically no prep for it or very minimal prep. And the technical part is super simple compared to webinars or writing or whatever. But that's a cool rule of thumb, like that I've seen now since we've gone and analyzed some other customer data. It's like, that's about right. Like assuming it's active and it's targeted right. It's not like some out of the world, no related audience, like a third to a half of review number totals can turn into customers in that $100 price range. So, I'm sure that would be maybe closer to 10% if you get to closer to 1,000, or maybe closer to 50 to 60% if you have a $10 product or something. But that was really interesting. I love that as just kind of a rule of thumb as you're making your podcast list. Like, look at number of reviews and start targeting for a conversion percentage of reviews as a sales goal. So that was kind of a cool thing. It might be worth skimming his interview and listening, because he's like really dialed into podcast touring as a pretty legit strategy for him. So
yeah, Matt actually sent me that interview and I looked at it, but I'm going to go listen to it intently now. Yeah.
It's good. It's good. And there's a really good write-up on it too on the blog, where Will, our writer, like got a bunch of screenshots and examples and stuff like that. So it'd be a good one to check out. Okay. Two last questions. What has been, or what's appealed to you about partnerships versus other marketing strategies you've tried in the past?
I think it's quicker. It brings results faster. It helps you validate your stuff faster. Because with any other method, I feel like it takes time upfront, right? But partnerships take lesser time upfront when compared to other things, like building up SEO by writing blog posts or growing a social media following. All those things are also helping you build an audience, but I think partnerships are faster, and also they build trust, right? Because when you are partnering with somebody that they trust, like for example, I do a partnership with a business owner, and all her audience trusts her already. So when I'm with her, they are more likely to trust me than when they randomly find me on Instagram. You know what I mean? Yeah. So I feel like building trust and also quickly building an audience. I think partnerships, I felt like were great for that. And especially when you're entering a new industry or like you're trying to make a name in a new niche. And I feel like partnerships are the best way to go.
So somebody's listening to this, or like, okay, like, I want to give it a try. What advice would you give to someone seriously considering using partnerships as their number one marketing strategy as opposed to something else?
I think do it. Like just doing it, like sometimes we think like, oh, who's going to partner with me? What's the benefit in them? I think that was my biggest mindset block that I had. Why would anybody say yes to me? Like, what do I have in return? But honestly, your expertise and your content, whatever it is that you can bring to the table, is really, really valuable. And you don't know that until you ask. So send it out. I know it feels like a lot. So send out the partnership, reach out like to other people. I think that's a big deal. Just do it. And once you see one or two partnerships come in, then you actually start feeling good about what you can bring to the table, and you can really double down on that.
I love you've only reached out to 10 of your 50 and it's generated over $100,000 of revenue. The immediate effect of that and the halo effect of that, of just other opportunities brought to the table. And that's probably the single best example of that I've seen. So great job. You've done great. I appreciate you. And I hope folks listening will be inspired by this. So thank you so much, Chaitra.
Yeah, thanks so much, Brian. Thanks for having me.
All right, thanks for listening in on my conversation with Chaitra. If you want to check out her business, head over to itspinkpot.com. If you want my team and me to audit your business, find partnership opportunities that you have, and coach you through executing them, just like we did for Chaitra, let's talk. Go to growthtools.com/apply and we'll set up a free strategy call with you. We'll talk through your business, find 2 to 3 small hinges that could swing big doors for you, and see if it's a good fit to work together. So go to growthtools.com/apply to book that call now, and hope to talk to you soon.